Hello everyone, my name is Andrzej Krzywda. Today we have a live code design review session, and I'm here with Tomek Stolarczyk.
Hi, I'm Tomek. I'm Java developer. Sorry for that. Yeah, I'm Java developer, and I'm interested in software design, software architectures, and coupling cohesion. We will talk about it today. So
Tomek is one of those people who is really educated in the code design and so on. And I received this recommendation from Tomek to read this book. I didn't really read it fully, Structured Design, but it's from Edward Yourdon. It's a very old book. It's the code examples are Fortran, right?
Fortran, yeah, and the book was published in the 70s. So yeah, it's quite old. There's a lot about procedural languages, not OOP itself. But actually, if you are looking for some foundations about coupling and cohesion, that's the book where you should go.
Yeah, so structured design, fundamentals of a discipline of a computer design. So I remember Edward Yourdon from another book, which was more about OOP, I remember, and that was like 20 years ago. So Edward Yourdon is a person from whom I probably learned OOP.
Okay, and there's one interesting thing also, because the second author is Larry Constantine. This guy actually, he coined the word coupling a few years before this book. He and two other guys, Bernard Meyers and not this one, Meyers, so from the CQS, but the other one. They coined the coupling and cohesion terms actually, because they were doing a lot of research about it. And actually from that point of in time, nothing actually changed in programming when it comes to coupling and cohesion.
But nothing has changed really, like we are now in the JavaScript world. I'm sorry, dear audience, today will be probably more jokes, maybe bad jokes, but it's a relaxed session here.
So that's joke alerts.
Probably mostly Ruby people in the audience, by the way. Hello, everyone. Hello, Ivan Shamatov. Hello, Sunkanmi.
I can see Przemek, he's Java as
Hello.
well.
We'll be doing some Java jokes probably. And we want to review some code examples. So the one that you currently see is the one from an application called +1. And +1 is an open source application. It was developed partially internally at Arkansas, but also we use it. Code looks good to me, Ahmad. That's ship. But also this application was made open source, and we sometimes used it for external people to let them to juniors, for example, to mentor them, or sometimes even for recruitment. I think it was used. So it's a mix of many people approaches. I started cleaning it up a little bit recently. The application is very, very simple. So it's all about adding +1 to each other on Slack and then remembering who received how many +1s. So there is nothing can be simpler than that, just as a simple counter. I've used it just to experiment with some design decisions and architectural decisions. But I'm saying this because we will probably, at some point of time in time today, we will need more examples of Ruby code, or Java code too. You can send Java code as well, but mostly Ruby code. So if you want to share some Ruby code and have this code reviewed and criticized by us, feel free. Or maybe you want to share Ruby code written by your favorite colleague and who you want them to be criticized, and that's fine with us.
You want to have some arguments.
And yeah, we just had a discussion with Tomek, so we know each other for quite long now, and we've been just discussing like different perspectives. So Java developer, Tomek, and I was a Java developer as well in the past. This is a less known history. And then I quit Java and left to Ruby. But okay, I think it's enough. Let's start. So please share links to GitHub maybe, or to whatever open source. Maybe you have no idea who wrote it. It doesn't matter. Maybe you have some questions whether certain coding patterns in Ruby are okay. Maybe you feel something is wrong, but you don't know. Maybe we will try. So we are not like the best experts in the world, but we'll try to, at least maybe Tomek will try to provide you some theory behind making decisions whether something is good or not. If you were in the Arkansas mailing list, you received a link to Tomek's free ebook. So Tomek was kind enough to write quite a lot about coupling and cohesion. So today there will be some coupling and cohesion arguments used. And you can download the book and you can look, because we will refer to some of those things. But okay, that's enough of this introduction. So let's dig into this code. And if you see, we'll try to look at the comments. If you see some examples of the code that we'll share, feel free to ask questions, feel free to criticize. Some of the conventions here are not exactly Ruby-like. For example, we rely at RKNC more on exception handling than probably other Rubies, I think. So some of the decisions might be different. But okay, Tomek had a look already at this code base a little bit, so I will leave it to Tomek to ask or to explain or criticize, whatever you like.
Okay. Also, if you have any other point of view, let us know. We can discuss it actually, live here. Okay, so we are going to start with controllers here, right? Mm-hmm. And the first thing that I was thinking about is this Slack message, where we have those messages based on the exceptions, for example. Mm-hmm. Because if you open the project structure on the left, also, you can see that we have the Slack controller in the controllers package.
Yeah.
And then we are referring to Slack is like some kind of package, right? Mm-hmm. Slack related things, in a way, and so on.
So we don't have to do packages as in Java when we do directories. And very often, this is a very often choice. But I'm actually, this is a nice topic to discuss. We tend to create app/directories for new concepts. So
okay.
But you say that there is something that brought to your attention, that we are referring to another package, right?
Yeah, because first of all, when I saw this Slack controller, Slack controller. So I was thinking why we are actually returning Slack messages if we can, if it doesn't have to be Slack. The integration doesn't have to be with Slack, right?
Yeah.
But actually, the controller, because I saw the routes then that they are Slack something, right? And then we have these messages. So I was thinking whether those messages are really Slack messages. If we go there,
come on.
Yeah,
we have microphone here, so it's. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because for example, this one, nope, not gonna happen. This is not Slack specific.
That's true,
right?
That's true.
And those...
the format, so the text column. So this is like the hash map, which will be turned into JSON. So this is probably the expected Slack format. So it must be text as a key and message as a value. So messages on their own, they are not Slack related, but the formatting that the map will be turned into JSON, this is Slack related.
Okay. So the format, you have to return from the controller the specific format.
They expect a response.
Okay, that makes sense. But actually, I was thinking also, because when I saw that the Slack messages, I thought that this is some kind of global variables that you return here.
In a way, it is. So very recently, it was actually inline. So recently, if I do refactor and inline, that was more like this.
Okay.
So I just wanted to hit some details. That was my recent change.
Yeah. So okay. Because I was thinking that maybe because why global variables are wrong, for example, they are wrong because they introduce some kind of it's called common coupling. So you have a shared state, global state that you share between components, but you actually don't know who uses this, who uses the shared state. And if you have a possibility to change the state, you don't know how those recipients will how it will affect them.
Yeah.
So for example, I know that we can't change actually the Slack messages in runtime. Actually, we could with open classes, right? But we don't do it.
That's something that you would usually expect people to do. So,
exactly.
So those messages, they are like global constants.
Global constants. So I was thinking why they are not like properties, for example. Do you have this concept actually in Rails that you can you can have those
so
things as properties?
It will be more like configuration in that case. It's probably less popular than I remember it from my Java career, but maybe someone in the audience knows like what would be the equivalent of Java properties. So they have those properties per environment variables are sometimes used, but that would be like probably not the right choice. I'm not sure what would be the equivalent, but I get your point. Like this is a configuration more.
Yeah.
You can also imagine that this is a data, and we actually keep it in the database probably, so that people can tweak it. The admin maybe they can tweak it. And just for you, everyone else here, for a context, this is a Slack related tool, but there was a request recently to make it Microsoft Teams related. So there might be an extension in this direction where Slack is just an option here.
That's actually why I'm asking those questions, because because I was thinking if we have some kind of let's say static data, I mean those messages, only messages, the content of message is something static, and we have Slack messages, then we would have probably Teams messages and so on, right? So we would have classes per messages, and I was thinking if we have them as properties, you could have something like message source or something like that, where you pass only context. For example, you are in the context of Slack, so you will get the messages for the Slack specific messages, for example, right?
And I think that unconsciously I've had that in mind, because when everything was inline, because quite recently everything was just a hash here, and then there was like, so the coupling was even worse. Was it worse if it was inlined? So my idea was that yes, I can first put it here. But this is still just a temporary step, and later on it will be extracted to maybe something like properties or database or context, or
because then you could have only one messages or message source, something like that. You would keep it in the controllers package, for example, because it would be used only for controllers, and then based on the application you use it, Slack or Teams, it would pass some context specific data, and then you would only pass, for example, key of the property and context, let's say. Right?
That will work.
Then all messages and all serving messages, even you could do the I18N. Then because based on the context you would have in one place, you would have the responsibility of delivering some messages.
Okay.
Something like that, right?
So I haven't really prepared for making that Microsoft Teams support. Like I'm not sure if I would have Slack controller. For the Rails people, I can show you the routes, and the routes, they're also like not very typical. It's not really RESTful. So from the Slack perspective, this is actually not working, but from the Slack perspective, this is the only endpoint where the Slack application me who gave points, or empty is the help call, and this is the +1. So this is actually the mutation, and this is the mutation. So from those two things, you can actually change something in the application. And based on those little objects called constraints, we can recognize based on the Slack specific format. So message parser is something that is also living in the Slack kind of namespace, but it's still not namespace yet. So we recognize what exactly this is about, right? And then we know what's the constraint, and we know where to go in the. So this is not possible. So okay, maybe we can go deeper, or
one thing, because I see a question, and actually this one might be interesting.
So okay, maybe I can show you. I can show it, everyone. That's a good question, Ahmed. That's the question?
Yep.
May I know why RKNC prefers exceptions to if-else statements? You want to start? Like, you are not RKNC, but
you can start, and I can.
Okay, so I don't really have good arguments. Like, for example, let's say I'm calling +1, so I'm expecting that the successful scenario is fine. But for example, let's say that someone tries to +1 themselves, and this is for me an exception. So I want to be very explicit that this scenario failed with such a message count +1 yourself. So instead of, for example, with the Ruby's or Rails people probably would do more like if the result is success, then do something, or if it's true or false, then do something. Like, Ahmed, maybe you can provide how would you do it differently? Because I feel like the handling of the response will be more complicated, while Ruby supports exceptions in a nice way, so I can do it in a declarative way. So that's probably, so I don't have really a huge philosophy behind it. I just feel like I can almost declaratively write code like that. So if this exception, then then I want to return a different message. If this was this exception, I want to return a different message. So that's my philosophy.
Okay, and because I also had a question to Andre about this handling those exceptions, because in Java, for example, frameworks, we have 3 ways of handling those, let's say, domain or exceptions that comes from the application, from internal exceptions. We can do nothing, and then the framework somehow will show the message to the user, 500 and some message.
Similarly, like with Rails. Okay.
So in the past, it was even worse, because then you could see the stack trace even sometimes, and that was not nice. Then you have a second solution where you can handle exceptions per controller. So, for example, you know which part you call, and then you can catch some exceptions, but then still you have possibility that you will miss some exceptions, and then framework will catch it. And the third option is also you can go with some kind of global advice, which is aspect.
Let's not go into aspects today.
Yeah, but you can have some kind of aspect, let's say, or global error handling, and then you can define on that if you get specific type of exception, you would, for example, use, I don't know, if you catch all not found exceptions, let's say, and you return 404, right, with some specific generic message, right?
I think Rails is also like possible to do it, but I don't remember exactly what's the mechanism.
And I was actually thinking here, because whether maybe because the global handling of exceptions is quite okay as well, because you have in one place, let's say, then it might have too much of those definitions, but it's quite okay, right? And then you have a clean controller, because here you call the methods, you call and also handle exceptions. So you miss 2 things in controller, right? 2 responsibilities, let's say, right? But that's quite fine. I think we can go deeper.
Okay, so there are some other suggestions, like maybe we can use factory pattern, which will help which class has to be chosen. That will be your understanding as well. Like I understand that those.
Because about the factory, I was thinking that it was regarding those messages. So you could, because then based on the implementation, you can also deliver.
Okay.
That's
maybe.
Makes sense.
Using active interaction could be useful here as well. I don't know really active interaction. Probably in Rails, we have quite a lot of frameworks for service objects, so for services. So probably that's a suggestion to use one of them.
Okay.
Does message factory is a good pick, or it breaks the Yagni rules here?
Here probably it breaks, as we don't need it for now. I mean, it's a small application, but probably in the long term, I would go with this approach, that I would have some kind of message factory or message source, we call it actually. We have such kind of abstract also in our Java, let's say. But for now, probably I would stay with it. I just wanted to show some kind of, my impression about it, right?
Okay. So let's go into the +1. So in a way, it's a service object, but I'm in the middle of bigger changes. It used to be much different. In some ways, it was better. In some ways, it was worse. What I'm trying to do with my refactorings recently, so I'll try to make the code bigger. What I'm trying to do is to make it more clear what are the domains under the hood, and there is probably more than one domain, which is actually interesting. It's more about architecture than about design, probably. But what I detected and I realized for this application, this really stupidly small application, is that there is a domain around the team organization. Like part of the logic here is about ensuring that someone belongs to the team and whether this user actually exists. And only part of that is about actually incrementing the points of a user, which is, again, more like updating a read model than actually business logic. So I'm trying to extract some domains from this code. So it's probably an overkill, probably Yagni, but this application is all about experimenting with some ideas. So that's what I do. And in the previous iterations, we looked together at this code base. Now it has slightly changed. Some places are better, some might be worse. So did you look at this code base? Like, do you see something that we can go into?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for the first time when I saw that, when I've seen that, I was thinking that this +1 is actually some kind of value object. I mean, because, it was something for me that it's domain object, but then I saw that that's the service, right?
Yeah, so that's the convention in Ruby, that you create a class and often you have a call method. And call is actually a convention because it's almost like syntactically supported. If it has a call, so just a lesson for Tomek. If it has a call method,
I'm converting to Ruby now, so
this would be equivalent. I can skip the call.
Okay, yeah.
So then it's treated as a function, as a lambda. So similarly, this could be a lambda. I would like to be explicit and just use the call method. And then we have maybe we can talk about params and how passing such things are good or bad.
Okay, I will just one thing, because I said that about the +1 because I was thinking that it's some kind of domain object, like you are informing me about the fact of giving +1. I didn't know it's some kind of service. And then I saw that you have upvote, right?
Upvote,
and
yes.
That's the domain object, let's say, right? That's the fact that you gave someone the upvote, right? And what is interesting here, this line actually, rise cannot +1 yourself, right? I was thinking that we have it now in the service, but that's actually some kind of domain logic, right?
Yeah, I agree here.
So maybe this could, for example, be moved to, I don't know, upvote.
Yeah. So this is the missing part, and I'm still trying to find out what's the right place. Like, so going into a DDD way of thinking for a moment, is upvote an aggregate, for example?
I don't think aggregate, but I think it's value object. But the value objects also have invariants, right? They can have an invariant. So you could not create valid upvote if the sender and receiver,
that makes sense,
recipient, and they are the same person, right? So that could be, for example, moved from. So then we are moving the business logic from the service actually to the.
So that would be something like, let's create this class here. I will see whether I can. So +1. And whoops, okay, coding live is not the best idea, maybe. And then we pass sender recipient, and then we raise in the constructor if they're the same, right?
I was thinking even in doing it in the upvote, because that's the entity, right? I mean,
upvote is more like, okay, I will just present you some historical context. At the beginning, we just had a user object probably, that I think, or it was like a member object, team member object, and so we only stored the points as the counter. Only later we wanted to have the history of people, like who actually gave the points to whom, and we use it in some statistics. So then we created this object, which is like an entity in the database. So now we have two. I'm treating them more like read models, which are just updated directly. But you can also think about it like this can be moved somewhere else.
So from my perspective, it was like upvote. I was thinking about upvote as some kind of domain object, value object, and then you could have read models based on the upvote somehow, right?
Yeah. So my idea is that
but I get it that you have to also increment recipient. Okay, so that's the logic. Okay.
Yeah. So my idea would be to have this. So to have this domain object created. Okay, there is a clash of namings right now, so it's just a pseudocode. So if it's fine, then we publish like event bus.
Okay. Yeah.
Publish +1. I know. I'm not even sure the +1 is a good. So we would create an event, and those two would disappear, and they would be handled somewhere else where you would say event bus.subscribe +1, and then update those read models.
Because then recipients and upload would be the review.
Yes,
models.
Exactly. They would be read models.
Yeah, that would be exactly. That would be good.
So I will just revert the last changes, and we can. Actually, the idea of a value object, I really like it as well. I was thinking whether some kind of aggregate way of doing it will be okay. We have some comment. So Jay says, I'm assuming that this +1 service is tightly coupled for controller because you're setting response directly from this service. So I'm afraid that we can't reuse this service other place. And that's a valid comment and a valid concern. Like I'm still not sure. So once I add Microsoft Teams integration, do I want to change anything in the Slack controller, or do I want to keep it like there's no reason to change it? I will just create Teams controller, like my MS Teams controller. Maybe somewhere at the beginning of the flow I would go further. But then there is this idea, do I want to, that's the main question, right? Can I or should I reuse this service object or this domain code somehow?
I'm not sure. I mean, I would probably go with some kind of solution that you don't have those Slack controller and Teams controller.
Okay.
I would probably go with some. I mean, it depends because I see that we have two concepts here, and I think we will get to it in prepare sender or recipient, but that we are tied. We are coupled with Slack implementation here.
Yes, very.
Right?
This is very coupled. Yes.
And if we could somehow split this, I mean, Slack implementation from the, let's say, core logic of the application, we could have, for example, the recipients, our recipients, and let's say somehow some kind of remote recipients. I mean, you know, representation of recipient in the integration. So the one integration is Slack, and we would have some kind of Slack recipient, but it would be not the domain object, but more like integration object with
infrastructure. So that was my, okay, it's still very vague and it's not clearly seen. So my idea of creating the Slack directory here or Slack package was that I want to move everything that is Slack related into this package.
And that's fine, but then I would, for example,
infrastructure.
If we have controller, I would have not Slack controller, but some,
right.
I mean, some generic controller.
+1 controller, or we also tend to call it karma. So you're just giving karma, which is another interesting point about this application. And maybe because this gave me some thinking, like, what's the name of the core domain and what exactly it's all about? So is it really about adding +1s? Because that's the result. I think this is like more like a read model that when I give us, I can give you a +1 on our Slack, even though you're not there. You're represented as a string.
Okay. Yeah.
And
okay.
And I can give you a +1, but when you think deeper about this whole situation with +1 each other, it's more like, I don't know, showing gratitude or showing respect or kudo. That's probably another word. So we used to call it karma. So you send good karma, from you to someone else. For example, there is a missing feature that you could +1 many people at once, for example. So that would be like, and at the application level, we can split it, which gets me to the point like, okay, like what is the core domain name? Basically, it's maybe, I don't know, gratitude or.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. But then, okay. But back to the question about the, I mean, controller and coupling to the Slack itself. I was thinking that you can as an application, which this is a +1 application, it could have its own API, and then those bots could connect with, right? Yeah, so we could have some generic endpoints here.
So not Slack related, but
not Slack related.
Yeah, I see. So and then we would use the same. So I don't really know how Microsoft integration will work. I have no idea what they expect, but they probably expect some endpoints as well. So your direction would be to give them the same endpoint, right?
Exactly.
And then we internally would handle it. Okay, makes sense.
And it depends on the request. I don't know what they send. Request some kind of request body, for example, probably, right? Then you would have something that would, let's say, parse this body and decide whether it's a Slack or whatever, and it would pass it as some kind of DTO, for example, for the further processing, right? If we can go to the +1 for a moment. Yeah, okay, because we are talking about the business logic here, but actually what got my attention is those lines, those two lines actually. Because if I see register if or something like that, it's for me it always smells a bit
I agree.
Like get or create, right?
Yes.
You don't know whether you query or you execute something, right? So it's always some kind of smell, and I was thinking about it here because take a look that we call this +1 every time user gives someone a +1.
Yes.
It's every time.
Yeah.
But actually, this creation of the team will happen only once.
Yes, that's true.
So we don't have to do it exactly. So we don't have to do it every time we call the +1, right? And we are actually discussing it, right? That probably we could move this somewhere before
outside.
Somewhere outside, because it's some kind of infrastructure thing. You are preparing the team, and you do it only once.
So because +1 is right now it's called from the controller. So one idea would be to move it here, right, to the controller, but then the controller will be like richer in the logic.
Yeah, but it will be a bit different because it could only check whether you have the team, and if not, it will create. And then in the +1, you would only you don't have to check. To create, only you take the team, right?
So I can just explain how it works under the hood and what is the user expectation, because this Slack bot is very simple. You don't register users, so whatever string we are sending or whatever the Slack ID in a special format we are receiving, we assume that this is a user people want. So I can say +1 J, for example, right? Because J was asking this question. So I can say +1 J on Slack to show gratitude to J. And J would be just created as a as a string and then as a user representation. And then every time I +1 J again, I would need to check whether J exists, and if so, I would retrieve them. So from an application perspective, we need to have this logic somewhere, right? We need to have the detection whether the user exists and register them if needed. So those are my steps that I've done recently, and the idea. Because by the way, Ahmed suggested having a +1 command. So my idea is to turn it, because I want this application to be more like CQRS. So I want to have commands as a ways of encapsulating the intent of the user. And the user, if they do the +1 for the first time and even the team doesn't really exist. So for example, RKNC as a Slack team is not there. So by the way, you can use the +1 on any, like you can easily plug it into your Slack and it should just work, or contact me if there are any problems. But once you, in the README on GitHub, you will find the basic instructions. And once you have it, you can just +1 whoever, and it will work. So it will register team at the first call. So I wanted to have register team as a command, and I wanted to have register sender as a command. And somewhere at the top level of the application flow, I wanted to say some kind of if statements would be needed to say detect whether the user was there, maybe based on some read model, and then send the commands. And once after we pass it, this is really the +1 territory.
And actually, I was also thinking of this register team. You could actually do it. I'm not sure whether it's possible, but you could have a different endpoint even for that, for creating the team. And if you, if you install the plugin in the Slack, it would call the create. It would only call for the creation of team.
Yeah, but the Slack integration, they don't really have this moment where they will call us. So we need to detect it. That would simplify quite a lot. At least I don't know. We are still using the old way of integrating with Slack. So maybe if we go with a bot integration, because they have bot, they have Slack messages, I think. So they have some ideas, different ways of integrating.
Sure.
And the one we are using doesn't really call us at the moment of installation.
That would be the cleanest way, right?
Yes,
if we have something, we would not have this logic anywhere on the handling of the +1 request. But because, as you said, now we have to do it somewhere in the processing of the +1.
Yeah.
Let's say. Okay, so this could be somehow moved even before the controller, as we also talked some time ago, that we could have some kind of interceptor on the request or something like that. Because the thing is that the team in this piece, you actually have to have team, right? From the domain perspective, you have to have team. So that's some requirement for the calling of +1, right? The same with the sender. And to here, I could probably move it only to prepare sender, maybe. I was thinking about that. I'm not sure whether it can be moved there or.
I don't even like the idea of having those prepare classes. Like they are here mostly for historical reasons, because that was the flow previously. I'm looking for ideas and inspirations, like how to somehow get rid of it. So I want to load the sender. Maybe it's more like repo.load. Maybe that would be.
Yeah, I actually have a question. Whether those are more like repos here or more like factories?
More like repos, because factories will be used when you have different kinds of users, and then you return different kinds based on something. But this is more like this is loading. This is just a repo. For some reason, it's saving. I wasn't sure if I can delete this line. Because it's probably something which is enough to do it once. So this is the line which is very, very smelly, and it should be removed, because without this, if it wasn't there, we would no longer need the save method. So this is very ugly, because maybe that's why it's prepare and not load yet, just to say explicitly that there is something funky going on, and the funky stuff is that we are actually loading and changing the object.
So it's again like we break a bit of CQS, right?
Yes.
We don't know whether we query or we do some action,
so
right?
for the audience, this is a very, very bad method. It almost says like it's just loading, but it's kind of loading, but it's also changing something. Very bad method. So I need to refactor it.
We can go back to +1 because if we have any questions, we can also.
So there's a suggestion from Matt, which is a good suggestion. We have a before action in Rails, so we can use before action in the controller. So if we are in the controller, we can move the preparing of the team and the register to the controller. So Matt, that's a good suggestion. However, based on my ways of using Rails, I prefer not to use the Rails mechanisms. Like this would work and this would be fine, but I prefer not to use the Rails mechanisms too much, and instead I would prefer to have maybe some of my own mechanism to do something like before certain services or before certain commands. But that's too philosophical for now. But in general, that your advice is right. It depends how much you want to couple to Rails and rely on Rails, and maybe when Rails upgrades and they change the behavior of before action, maybe you need to be careful about that. So that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I agree, but this creation of the team, as we said, is some kind of infrastructure. Right? So it could be connected with the framework itself, because framework does this infrastructure things, right? And you have then cleaner domain, because then if you don't have team here in this place, you would probably raise some exception because you don't have a team, right? The one thing that
this is one kind of orthogonal, because once in a way adding +1 to someone, I don't really want to think about teams. I just want to send +1 to someone and not care about it. So this is orthogonal, and this should disappear. By the way, let us know in the comments if you like this code session so far, like whether we should continue in this spirit or you want something else. And for now we'll continue.
One thing important here is also, which I actually don't like, is this passing params and team params to the method. We wanted to talk about
very very typical pattern in the Rails community.
Yeah, because if you have few types of coupling, this is something between, let's say, control and stamp coupling. Because when you have control coupling, you have to have you as a caller, you pass a flag to the method, so you basically know how the code inside works, right? Because you know which flag, how to set flag to call specific parts of the code, and you are expecting some kind of result based on the. So it's a
coupling based on the situation that I have influence over the code that I'm calling.
Exactly, and that's the control coupling. And a better way there is on the scale is control coupling, and the better type of coupling is actually stamp coupling, where you have the coupling to the structure of the passed param. So it's like DTO. I don't know, do you have the concept of DTOs?
We have the concept of DTO, like, okay, we don't call it like that. So data transfer object is rarely used in the Rails community. I think the most popular way of doing this is basically, this is a hash map. So we call it, this is a hash, and we would pass a hash, but that's, obviously hash is very flexible. We can add everything.
Exactly, but you have this, if you take a look here, exactly, here and here, you have some kind of coupling to the structure. You have the map, and you have to have specific values, specific keys, and that you have to know that from the color perspective, you have to know that you have to set this parameter and this parameter. So if you are in controller and you don't pass params and that's it, you know that you have to pass params plus specific params with specific keys and values, right? So that's not a good idea, probably.
I agree.
So what I would do here is I would probably create some kind of DTO to have explicit saying that it's also, let's say, stamp coupling, the same, let's say, level, but you would only create the DTO which is valid. So for example, you would explicitly say that I have to have in this DTO team ID, for example. So you would not have possibility to create this DTO without those params, because now you can pass everything in those params. And then you would explicitly say that I have some kind of, what is that? And DTO, I don't know, sender, recipient, or I don't know.
So we only accept params and team params for now, but there are two different hashes, two different maps.
Yeah, I would also, because if we would like to have the, let's say, data coupling here, which is the best one, let's say, we would not have the params here, we would have explicit only those values. So
maybe we want to have a team object and sender object and recipient object, maybe.
That is even, yep. Okay. But even better idea, I mean, because there are two things. One is the measure of coupling, and the other thing is, let's say, pragmatic way of doing it, right? Okay. So if you, for example, have pass only team ID, like here, team ID, username, what's there? Could you scroll a bit here? There is.
So team ID, username, and user ID.
Exactly. If you just pass those three parameters, if you have a method and you have to pass those three parameters, then you are not connected to any structure of the list of the array, map, whatever. You only get the parameters that you will need within this method, right? But then I'm not sure whether it's a good idea to pass those parameters, because then you can have, I know,
long list,
4, 5,
so
6.
This is what was here before. Register sender, if needed, was actually it still is. So register team member is a separate function right now, so separate service object. Now it's just creating, so it's a long line, but it's just creating a team member based on those params. It used to be params here. So in this code base before, so I applied this refactoring, which you are suggesting as one of the first steps, probably, right? So we can be more explicit of what we are accepting. And I wonder, you people in the audience watching us, by the way, thanks for a good feedback. Because in the Rails community, we really have this popular pattern of passing params. So it starts at the controller, then you pass it to the service object, then you pass it to the active record models. So we really don't have control, and we know that somewhere deep down, if someone accesses like team params, team domain, and this is not existing in Ruby, and sorry, it's not Java, it would just crash on production, right? If it was set to nil, the nil would be like passed further down, so it wouldn't really be a compile time problem.
Yeah,
so I wonder what's your idea here for whether passing params is okay or not, because this is super popular in Ruby.
So for me, passing params would be it's not good here in this approach. As I said, I would pass param the value of the param,
the specific value.
Specific value, okay. Or like we have here this, as you said, sender or recipient, just to the service, So then you have the domain, let's say, object here. Or
so I usually do it in steps. So my first step is almost always being very specific, but the code smell is immediately that there is a long list of arguments. But I want to make it explicit. It should hurt me. Like it shouldn't be acceptable to have those params. So I make them explicit, and then it's a long list. So it should be I should be worried about it. So my next refactorings will be to encapsulate it either in some kind of DTOs. Or there is maybe something screaming here that we are doing something really wrong at the architectural level. So that was my attempt to, if we move it above, so let's say we would move it to the before action, immediately we don't need team params anymore, because it's probably, okay, maybe we need team ID because that's usually what is accessed from team params, but everything else from team params is not needed. So that way we would reduce the coupling to all the kind of params. I understand. Okay, makes sense.
And you actually mentioned about those prepare classes. Do we have any questions here?
So Jess says, instead of service, I feel like this should be in controller concerns because we are using params value, which I think it fits there good. Okay, let's, concerns is like, I will not be able to explain to you. It's a Rails concept.
I was thinking that Jay has concerns.
Yeah. Okay, the service is a bit fat. We agree. So we are looking at this, how to simplify this.
Yeah, but one way about this DTO that you said, that's also a good idea because you still have some kind of coupling to the structure of the DTO itself. But actually, you can enforce that you create only valid DTOs.
Yes.
Right.
That's the problem of params. I think it's like accepted in the Ruby community to pass params. In a way, we think about it as DTOs, but they're not DTOs because they can accept everything. And somewhere in the middle of your control flow, you realize, oh my God, this is actually, there are some values missing.
Okay, and because this reminds me also about the way that we could have something similar in Java. Let's say if we have the controller, we have the request object there, but this request object is from the framework. Let's say it's a framework object. So sometimes you could see the code where we take this request and we pass this request to the the service, for example, and that's a bad thing because you have external coupling because you are coupled to the external library, right? Yeah. In the service. It's also not good, right? So
params actually they are in a way also framework specific. Like I'm not sure if that's still the way we do it in Rails, but it's not really a map. It's a hash with indifferent access, which is a Rails extension to the hash map.
Okay.
So in a way, it's also actually a very good point. So in a way, it's similar to the request object.
That said, there is a working effectively with legacy code.
Yeah, I can pass it.
Actually, it's on the beginning of the book where there is said that don't do it, don't pass, framework specific request to.
But the problem with Ruby and Rails, the problem with Ruby is that we don't see the classes, like we don't care about classes that much. So from our perspective, it's just a map. Actually, probably few people know that at some point there was a Rails extension to the map.
Okay.
Microservice for register team if needed. Joke taken. Can we use struct open struct as a DTO? So structs are almost like they are like DTOs. So there are special kind of frameworks for creating structs in Ruby. Like for example, there's dry struct or open struct, but I think they fit the definition of DTO very well because they have the schema. They have this idea that they enforce what is passed. And my personal opinion is that I prefer not to use those external libraries, even dry struct, because I find it like I'm able to create my own constructor and raise exception if something is missing. So I don't need a library for that.
I'm skeptic sometimes to use let's say external libraries inside your core code because then you have this coupling, external coupling, which is not good also to the external library provider, right? Yeah. So you are not in the charge of API and so on.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but unfortunately, this is a very, very I don't know how to call it. It's part of our community that whenever there is a gem for something, it will be used. So people like to outsource like everything, which is a good idea if you outsource like infrastructure parts or something like very Rails specific. But I think it's sometimes dangerous in our community that we are relying so much on the external gems, even for simple things like creating a constructor, for example.
Okay, yeah. So just maybe to clarify from my side, if I'm talking about this external coupling, and this is the type where you have coupling to the external library, or for example, some kind of protocol or standard. So if you integrate with someone and he talks he uses some kind of protocol, you have to, have a coupling to this protocol, because you have to create some kind of messages and so on. So the good idea is to create some kind of anti-corruption layer. So you have your domain code, and then only in one place where you integrate with the external service, you do mapping, right, between one and another. The only thing that we could discuss here also is those prepare classes, and maybe this prepare recipient.
I think prepare recipient is a bit bigger. Yes, it's very complicated and ugly. Please don't write such code. But it's ugly for like, this is most like accidental complexity. It uses an external dependency. There used to be a code which was working but no longer works, where you can fetch the name. But this is Slack disabled this option now. So actually, a whole integration with Slack can disappear from this.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, because that's actually what got my attention here, that we do a lot of things here in this prepare class. Let's say, and we have this Slack adapter, right?
Yes. Also, we have references to message parser, which is actually a Slack related stuff.
Okay, and that was the point where I was thinking that we are too much coupled to the Slack implementation, to one implementation of this +1 thing. Also, yeah, exactly, because here, for example, we clean the name, right? So what we get from the Slack adapter, we could probably do it in the Slack adapter itself. And
exactly.
That was the point where I was thinking that we are somehow mixing two concepts. We have the users on our side, our +1 users, and we have Slack users, like remote representation of our users, right? And by this line, actually, I was thinking we are mixing a bit here. We have this.
Definitely.
We have some kind of mapping here, which probably should not be in the prepare recipient, because I think prepare recipient in this case should prepare our representative, exactly,
our object,
and we should not have it here. Yeah.
So there's a mix. This is partially it's a repository, partially it's because we are in the prepare, right? Yes, prepare recipient. Partially it's some kind of Slack adapter, and also partially what we are doing here is okay. It's not really part of the repository, but we have this recent logic of aliases. So I can have Tomek Stolarczyk, or I can have Tomasz Stolarczyk, because when people +1, they will usually forget what's the right way, and they will confuse and create something new. So this new logic of aliasing is it's a new logic. So I put it here, knowing this is wrong. This is not the right place. But again, it's a good idea. Like, okay, where does it belong to, right? It should scream, and it does scream to me, it's a wrong place. But now is the question, okay, but where should I put it? Where's the logic of aliasing? And I still don't have a good answer probably for that.
Yeah, I was also thinking whether we need actually Slack adapter here, or we could get this name to prepare. But then I was looking at the code, and I thought maybe it's some kind of, let's say, complex creational pattern that you have to create a user. You have to do a lot of things.
Not really. This code is overcomplicated for no reason, basically. So it was more like historically someone started with one line of code, someone added a second line of code, then I added aliasing here. Meanwhile, the Slack integration actually stopped working, so it's not really used here. So all this stuff can be actually removed. So the logic itself is also not so complicated. I suppose aliasing is also less our domain layer, but more we can move it to. So you see, okay, so it is already in the organization, which I think will be a bounded context called organization. So I suppose aliasing will be part of it, but on the other hand, it shouldn't have any I don't know, request to the read models or to the database. Like maybe we can even source it later.
Yeah. Could we go to Slack adapter if we talk about it?
So it's here. As I said, it's now no longer working, but it used to work, so it used to be correct.
Sure. The one thing that actually I would discuss is probably because we have this calling Slack, right? I was just thinking that maybe we could separate this logic of calling to some kind of Slack client. I mean, because you have Slack adapter, and it's some kind of what it does actually.
It returns a string in the end, I think. Get really username as a string.
So it somehow process the response from Slack, right?
Yes.
And I was thinking that maybe that's just an idea. I don't know for now because I was not looking into it too much, but that maybe we could have client, and the client actually does what Slack allows you to do. I mean, can call specific endpoints, and that would be only responsibility of the client, that he does the HTTP call to specific endpoints, and he would give you an API to Slack API. You would have some kind of proxy then, and adapter itself, it would only process the response of the call. That's just that's just the
that would be simpler. So I think, by the way, when I wrote this code, or that wasn't actually me, someone from, I don't remember who was that. When we wrote this code originally, or someone external wrote it, there wasn't yet a gem for Slack communication. So now I suppose we could consider relying on some external library. Maybe even Slack provides now the official Ruby library. So some parts of it could be replaced. And this is the part where I would be okay with going with official libraries instead of...
then take a look that if you have some kind of abstraction of the client, Slack client, I mean, you don't call it... you call it Slack client, and it's some kind of interface. Interface in Ruby, you have also interface.
We have them like implicit, but
okay. But if that's some kind of interface without, let's say, implementation, right? It only gives you an API for the Slack, right?
And I can replace it.
And then you have your own implementation, my net something implementation, which is working. And then in the meantime, you could write your Slack implementation based on this external library. And then you could simply switch.
The problem with those libraries, I don't know exactly how the Ruby Slack library works, but usually they would work probably that they would almost talk to my database. That would be like a very, very deep integration. So that would be like, if that's the way, then I wouldn't really choose this library, but that would be a very popular approach probably. So the framework kind of thinking in the Rails community is very huge. So people like to, so I would just plug this into my application, like fully at all layers. We wanted to cover the whole active record.safe concept.
That's a short one. I mean,
we'll see.
Because some time ago, maybe some background. Some time ago, when I was working on this ebook, I was looking for the code examples of different types of coupling, and I found on the one, I don't recall the company, but they are Ruby company also, and they were explaining types of coupling, and regarding the control coupling, they said that safe method.
I think that's the one. I'm not sure because there are multiple implementations of safe, but let's assume.
Me neither. I mean, I remember what they were saying actually, that, and before you could have save with false parameter, and then you would not have validations before saving your data. And then there was a change in the API that you were getting save, and you explicitly had to say validation.
Yeah, so I suppose it's like hidden somewhere here.
Validate OA.
Yeah, validate. So that's the options validate.
Yeah.
Again, passing via hash map. Again, that's the pattern.
I see it. Yeah. And then you would also have to set it. So we're calling save, validate false, right? So you as a caller, you know how internally it probably works, because you have to say, don't validate, right? You have false, don't validate the data. And usually,
which is part of a bigger problem of passing Boolean params.
Exactly, because if you have, as a caller, has to know that, that's not good, right? Because it's not a black box for you.
Something disappeared. We've had a short connection problem, but it should be fine again. Let us know if there is any interruption. But let's continue. It should be fine.
Yeah. So if you have control coupling, the good idea is to have two methods. For example, save and save without validation. You don't pass any parameters. You say save or save without validation. If you know that saving is with validation, for example.
So I remember that I knew this rule that you shouldn't pass Boolean as params, and they should lead you to this kind of design choice where you have two different methods. And I've had lots of arguments at some point with Rails developers that this is almost like a very accepted and common pattern that you pass those maps, the hash map, and the hash map defines the configuration of what you really like. So save is a short, fancy like name, and then you pass the whole configuration. So you really, as you said, you really have the control of it's leaking to you what is happening under the hood. Exactly. But in a way, you have this. I think what is achieved here is there's a huge love in the Rails community to DSLs. So you have this short, concise way, and creating hashes, creating maps is very nice and short in Ruby. So it is just like the colon. Add to stream. So now we should be back. Apologies for the problems. Let's see how long this will be fine. And let me add the screen again. Okay, let us know if now it's better. And again, sorry about that. So we are talking about the save method. We'll be watching the connection maybe. And the Boolean, you're back. Thank you, Supreme. Thank you for staying with us. So we are talking about passing the Boolean variables and the DSL. So there, I said that in the Rails community, there is quite a lot of acceptance to have those short methods, but then you pass the map, and the map is actually a configuration. So you have full control of what is happening.
I think that's also different from my point of view, because if we have in Java, we have this static, that's static language, we have to have some kind of type that you pass. So
right.
That's why we usually go with DTOs. It helps us to keep some kind of contract what you are passing to. We don't. I'm just thinking how we would do it. In Java, if we would like to use params, we probably would use listage, which is not handy, let's say. So yeah, it's better for us to create some kind of DTO, right?
Yeah. So maybe this is interesting, like at the language level, that maybe the language influences the way we design the APIs. I'm a big I accept Rails as a framework, and it gives us also things for free, but I do disagree with some of the design choices, like with the options being passed and so on. Like under the hood, lots of things are happening. We have the control over it via the options hash map, but like it's really very big coupling overall. So safe and safe without validations, that would be like one of the choices you would go for. And we don't have in Ruby method overloading, so we couldn't say safe, and based on the param, we couldn't be running different stuff. So
actually, I would probably go with safe and safe with a validation. I'm not sure about that.
Okay, that's a good point. That would make all the Rails Hello World applications uglier.
Okay.
And that's a very important reason for Rails developers. But I can see, like, you're right. It's more like safe with validations, because that's the consequence of active record as a pattern. Like, because like active record is not only put some data in a database and retrieve it, but there is like some logic, right? So this is like consequence of using active record. So validations is the way of enforcing the logic. And by the way, enforcing the logic in Ruby, like you can. If you have. Where did I come from here? So here is prepare team. So team is a typical active record class. And here's no validations, but if there was something like validates name, presence, true, then even though you have this validation, you're still able to create team.new and pass name as like this, and this wouldn't crash. This wouldn't raise an exception. So instead, what you need to do in Ruby, in Rails, in active record, is you need to check if it's valid.
Okay, but it would when you're saving, right? It would.
Yeah. So in save, we usually do, for example, so very typical code is if team.save, because then it returns true or false, whether this was successful or not. Under the hood, it just returns whether something was valid or not. And then we have if team save and else, we know that team errors is not empty. So we have our really coupling. I think this is where coupling really shines in the Rails design, where we just say save, and somehow as a result, we have access to collections of not empty errors.
Okay.
Which is even better. You actually have access to error messages. I think, I don't remember, like it was called with messages, full messages. I never remember this. But those are basically the same messages that they would display on the UI. So imagine this kind of coupling all the layers together.
We've talked about it also already, that if you use a framework too much, it does a lot of magic, right?
Yeah.
And this magic is this is coupling actually, right? Because you are assuming some behavior, some things,
So a lot of the design, like maybe this will now, I will create my propaganda here, but a lot of the design choices at the active record level is so that Rails keeps being newbie friendly. So people who are completely new to programming, they come to they just come to Rails and they type Rails new and they type Rails scaffold, and they almost understand everything how it works, and in a way they can create simple applications. And that's the part where it's awesome. Like, I don't disagree with that. I think this is why Rails is still an important player among the other languages. But at the same time, we are left with those design choices for forever. So the same stuff that is making things easy for newbies is causing problems for senior developers 1 year later. Especially if people rely on team.errors and team.errors with messages and stuff like that. So lots of coupling, and to uncouple, or as Robert said it recently, there should be a metric to say like which framework has what level of ejectedness, how you can eject from a framework. So Rails is possible to eject, but it's just very, very costly. Once you go with active record pattern, it's not so easy to get out of such things.
Yeah.
It's a lots of small steps.
Yeah, but that's actually issue everywhere. I mean, in Java, we also have some kind of new frameworks that support microservice approach and so on. And what I see is that they enforce you to, let's say, use the framework everywhere. You have to use if you want to have a client, REST client, for example, you annotate, right? And if you annotate, you are connected to the framework. You have to use it. You know, there is a lot of declarative way that you create only interface, and the framework will generate the code, you know, bytecode for you. And okay, it's really quick to to develop new things, to call external services and so on. But then you stick to the implementation, to the one framework, and it's not easy to to extract your domain logic, somewhere on the side, right? And to replace, for example, framework. We don't do it a lot, but it's
so it's everywhere a temptation with going with the framework way.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I think one topic which we have left still is the how to define what is cohesion and where to show this problem of cohesion.
So if coupling measures, let's say, connections between classes, the cohesion is more like measure how well specific elements of the class fit together. So if you were saying about some kind of service that it's fat, it probably is something like it has a low cohesion because it does too many things at the same time. It has too many responsibilities, right? And actually we have 7. I mean, in those 70s they defined 7 types of cohesion.
Okay.
So the first one is coincidental, which is also called pathological.
Okay.
Pathological.
Okay.
Cohesion, where no, that was the coupling. Coincidental cohesion. Sorry, coincidental cohesion. So you in the class you have elements that do not fit together at all. They were
just randomly.
They randomly were put together in one class.
So cohesion is more about the scope of one class, while coupling is more about connection between two objects or more.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
okay,
exactly. Because if you have some kind of functionality, but actually, I think both of them, they are quite abstract concepts. I mean, coupling and cohesion, and you could, for example, also think about them on different levels. So on the class level, I would say even on the microservice level, for example.
Or
because if you have microservice, for example, and it does a lot of things, it's not microservice anymore, right?
Yeah.
And it has low cohesion, let's say.
No one cares about the micro word in the microservices. Everyone just says it's all about HTTP. If it's under HTTP, behind HTTP, then it's my microservice.
Exactly. And yeah, so the cohesion says you how well elements work to achieve some kind of goal. Let's say, right?
So, for example, I was asking Tomek before we started going live today, whether typical Rails controllers, if there is any problem with their cohesion, because we know they share something because they are something about slug, and they share some ideas about calling different service objects. But still, the cohesion probably is not the best one here. What do you think?
It's not too bad. I mean, if you only use those controllers to pass the flow to the services, let's say, so you are doing one thing. You route, actually, right?
Yes.
You are handling the request and pass it, and that's it. The only thing is that you have methods that are grouped into the controller because they do different things. So they group they pass the flow to different services, for example. but they actually only pass the traffic, let's say, right?
Right.
So the responsibility of the controller is to pass the traffic. If you start to add some other things like, oh, let's call some some endpoint in our controller, that's then you are breaking, let's say, cohesion, right? Because you are doing two things. You are not passing. You are also requesting for something. But they are not too bad. I mean, they would be around on the middle of the scale, a bit above the scale, let's say.
Let me have a look at something else. Like,
I mean, they are in.
If it has one public method, then the cohesion is not a problem, right? Because
yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay, we have get stats maybe, but this is again. So lots of my code here is just one method.
I think the worst, let's say, cohesion here was this prepare.
Okay.
Sender or
prepare recipient was most complicated.
Yeah, I think so, because it does a lot of things. I mean, it calls the slug. It also
so is it also
creates those aliases.
This is like another way of saying what's the command? There is a Ruby tuple SRP, single responsibility principle. So cohesion is about, or SRP is about cohesion. Probably. Okay.
Actually, all of those good practices in OOP. That was actually the reason why I was reading about coupling and cohesion, because I was reading about some, I was investigating principles and so on. And then I think it was Uncle Bob publication when he was saying about solid.
Okay, so you started with solid.
I think so. I was around solid. I was doing some investigation around the solid, and then I actually discovered that under all those principles, they are all about coupling and cohesion, usually, because you have to create classes that does one particular thing, let's say, a specific thing, and they should be they shouldn't be connected tightly together. So in the general approach, you should have low coupling and high cohesion, right? In the design. But then you have some, of course, in every application, you have some places where you use those worse types of coupling and cohesion because it's pragmatic way of doing things, right? Yeah, and that was the reason why I started to investigate coupling and cohesion, because most of good practices are about it, actually. Okay, yeah, because there's also one interesting concept, because we have symptoms of rotting design. Uncle Bob said about the rotting design, and those are 4 symptoms. It's rigidity, fragility, immobility, viscosity. We can talk about all of them, but it doesn't make sense now. But all of them say that if you see those symptoms in your code, you have some issues with dependencies between classes, modules, whatever. And you have issues with dependencies if the coupling is high and cohesion is low.
Yes.
So you have to work on those two concepts and think about cohesion.
Those are like design drivers.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I think we are already like for quite a long. It was longer than planned. So let us know if you liked it, and let us know if you have questions to Tomasz. Maybe if you want to have Tomasz more often here. We live quite close to each other, so Tomasz, like, while I live in a forest almost, Tomasz lives in a mountain area, but we are like one hour by car from each other.
If you have a code to review, I mean, I like it. I like to read Ruby code, but
okay.
Don't say Java developers about it.
So yeah, please send us questions where we can buy your book.
It's free. It's ebook.
So maybe I will open the Mr. Picky Dev.
Yeah. /root.
Okay. Okay, I need to share the screen. So first of all, stop screen, share screen, application window, and what? StreamYard. So that will be for a moment bad, but that should be better. So this is mrpicky.dev, and there is loot where Tomasz was kind enough to share an ebook and 2 notes I can share you. So if you go to Mr. Picky, I will maybe paste it here. So this is free. I can show you how it looks like because it's like really useful, and I'm really surprised that you give it for free. So I will stop screen again, and then I will share screen with one of those nice sketches, maybe coupling sketch notes. So apart from the book, you also receive something like that's the one, right? Yeah. So nice drawing. Who did the drawing? You did?
No.
Okay.
Friend of mine.
Okay, so nice drawing, and this is something that I really want to print soon and put it somewhere in my office to remember about the coupling. There's a similar note about cohesion, and the whole book is 26 pages, so you definitely should get money for that.
It was my dump of my thoughts.
Okay, so that's the book. All right, let me also, so let us know if you have any more questions, and if you liked it so far. I will quickly show you the idea behind railsarchitects.com. So as you know, this conference is sponsored by Rails Architects Masterclass, and today I will just go with very briefly. So you have 2 days if you want to join the Rails Architect Masterclass. We have about 150 developers who already are there among 3 editions. Now is the 4th edition. And basically it's somewhere between. So today we were talking quite a lot about the design level, and the masterclass is more at the architectural level, but there are some design levels modules as well. So for example, how to implement the business logic, how to communicate between objects, how to build state machines without relying on external gems. So there is 12, actually 13 modules, I think, but the 13th one was forgotten to be added to the 10. So the first 4 modules are the most important because they introduce you to the world of DDD, CQRS, and event-driven architectures together with event sourcing. And then we have 2 modules which are more about like architectural kata. So you're presented with a homework to do and try to solve a very complex business problem with Ruby using those concepts from the first 4 modules. And then we show you some ideas how to implement the business logic with aggregates. Then there's a whole module where payments are implemented. So basically, there's almost a full implementation of a payment bounded context. And then we talk a lot about how event-driven architectures can influence your front-end integration. We definitely talk about microservices. And we talk about testing and functional programming also as well. So, and there are like some of the videos are like this one. So screencast, explaining some code. Sometimes it's just a talking head. You get access to your homeworks will be reviewed. You get access to domain-driven Rails video class, which is like almost like a separate product. Rails TDD class. So it's actually once you buy it, you get more than what you think you have. There are live meetings, and you get access to recordings for the meetings from the first 3 editions. So lots of questions are already answered. There will be more lives. Yeah, there's like actually it's not 1 year access; it's a full live access to the Slack channel. And if you buy it as a team with at least 3 people, you will get your own private channel for your team, in addition to the existing one. So it's $800. I know it's quite a lot, but maybe for some of you this will pay off when you know how to. Maybe you can your company can afford that, so that you can learn how to fix your current Rails application. And by the way, if you have any problems with your Rails applications, then feel free to contact RKNC. We are happy to help with big Rails applications. So that's. And I forgot to share the screen, obviously. So I was talking. Okay, so you can go to railsarchitects.com, and
it was really cool.
It was really cool. I didn't really want to make a huge offer today. So thanks to Tomac. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let us also know if you like the whole idea of the conference so far, Rails Architects Conference. On Monday, there will be the last session by me. Or me and maybe someone else from RKNC will probably do something like a Q&A. So we have some remaining questions. We will do them on Monday, and then we will close the sale to railsarchitects.com, so to Rails Architects Masterclass, and the next chance will be not sooner than 6 months from now. Did I forget anything? Probably that's it. So if there are any, so Supreme says, thanks for the talk. It appeals to me and it's better than standard ones. Cool, thank you. We should probably be more jokes about Java and Ruby. Okay, thank you.
Java developers wear glasses, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't C#.
But we also don't C#. Okay, thank you everyone, and see you on Monday, hopefully. Goodbye.
See ya. Bye.